So I recently posted a video talking about the issue with the employment rate of youth in Canada. And funny enough, I actually had written a post talking more in depth that really gets into the numbers and the weeds. And because that video did really well, I thought that this one is probably going to do even better because I have actual data to back up what I was talking about before. So that's basically going to be what this video is about. It's just the data behind what the problem actually is. Hopefully you find it interesting. And without further ado, let's get into it. There have been a lot of interesting developments happening in Canada related to employment that I think are worth discussing. I'm going to explain why Canada has one of the highest youth unemployment rates that it has ever seen, why Canada's GDP growth has actually been negative for the citizens of the country, and how politics are influencing the issue and what people in power are starting to do or not do about it. So Toronto and Ontario are lagging behind the rest of Canada. The first topic that I wanted to touch on is unemployment in specifically Ontario and Toronto, where I now live. The unemployment rate in Toronto in November 2024 was sitting at 8.2%, which is higher than Hamilton at 6.7%, Kingston at 5.8%, Ottawa at 6.1%, St. Catharines at 6.6%, and almost every other major city in Ontario except Windsor at 8.5%. Toronto's unemployment rate is comparable to Northern Ontario, where work is notoriously hard to find, and their rate is sitting at 8.4%. And again, Toronto is 8.2%. The overall unemployment rate in Ontario was 7.2%, which is higher than the national rate of 6.8%. So, why is Ontario doing worse than the country as a whole, and why is Toronto doing worse than the rest of the province? Let's find out. Overshooting immigration targets. Unemployment is the symptom, not necessarily the cause. In order to find the cause, we need to understand how unemployment works first, and this is generally just a case of supply and demand. But there are other factors at play too, like interest rates, immigration, migration, investment, etc. As we've all been made aware by now, Canada overshot its immigration targets by a significant amount in the past couple of years, and the government is beginning to try and put more restrictions on people coming into the country. Generally speaking, Canada has always been friendly to immigration, especially people who are highly skilled workers and are able to contribute positively and fill needs within our economy, which is a good thing. It benefits us, it benefits them, hopefully, and everybody's happy. It has been stated many times that the only way for Canada to maintain its pension plans and continue growing GDP and productivity is through immigration because of our lackluster birth rates. So if immigration is such a good thing, why have we decided to cut it down? Well, part of the reason is that we have nowhere to put people. Housing has become such a large issue and pain point, and renting or buying almost anywhere in the country has become extremely unaffordable. People come here, expect to find a reasonable home, and realize that a huge portion of their paycheck is going towards their rent or mortgage. This doesn't explain unemployment, but it does help explain some issues that we have with our economy as a whole. Canada has the highest household debt in G7 nations, which curbs our spending. Another factor in our problematic economy is that Canada has the highest household debt to income ratio in the entire G7, meaning that people in Canada are extremely over-leveraged on their homes and rent payments. This affects the economy in ways people may not realize or understand. Traditionally, the people who spend the most money tend to be the middle class, and spending money tends to be what stimulates the economy and leads to growth and expansion. What has happened over the past few years with the skyrocketing costs of housing, the expensive mortgages that people are renewing into, and generally high inflation is that now people have less excess money to spend, and along with that, lower consumer confidence, which means that they feel like a storm is coming, so they're saving their money in preparation for such storm. And this all leads back to lackluster spending, which leads back to why we're seeing the things that we're seeing related to unemployment, and basically less money circulating is less money overall for the whole economy. So that's why we cut interest rates to try and get money circulating again. And that's just one of the things that we do. There are lots of other tools that the Bank of Canada can use in order to try and stimulate an economy. But we also have a problem related to how many people we have, demand for jobs versus supply of those jobs, and all of that works into this equation somehow. If people are not spending, there's no reason for companies to make investments in their workforces, to make investments in R&D for new products, when there's no demand for those things, and in many cases, shrinking demand for the things they already produce. We now find ourselves in a situation where our GDP per capita, or per person, has actually gone down at the fastest rate in the G7. Part of the reason per capita is down is that we've let so many people into the country recently, over 1 million a year ago, if you include immigrants and non-permanent residents. The overall GDP has actually gone up in Canada compared to a year ago, but per person it has gone down. So we basically juiced our numbers with a whole bunch of people coming to the country, and they are working, a lot of them, and they are, contributing to the economy. But overall, the amount of money that each person is contributing to economic growth, if you will, has gone down. Here's a fun fact for you. Without all of these extra people kind of boosting our numbers, we'd actually be in a recession in Canada right now. Like on paper, right? 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. The reason we haven't seen that is because of all the surplus people that are coming into the country. The way that falling GDP per capita manifests itself in people's day-to-day lives is the realization that your money doesn't go as far as it once did, and struggling to afford and adjust to owning fewer things or being able to afford fewer luxuries and fewer benefits overall that come with a growing economy. Life has become more difficult and paying bills has become more challenging in the past couple of years for the grand majority of Canadians. There is literally less to go around. But the economic headlines don't usually focus on GDP per capita. They focus on GDP and proudly promote the fact that our economy is technically growing. Newcomer credentials aren't being recognized. Because of all of these factors, high interest rates, high levels of household debt, low business investment, declining GDP per capita, and millions more people coming to the country, these problems are also making it even more challenging for all the people and students that come here. I don't believe that people who come here should expect for the government to solve their problems, but by the same token, I'm not sure that it's fair that we're asking and telling people to come here and then they're met with the reality that there is just nowhere for them to work, or their credentials aren't recognized, or a million other hurdles are put in their way to succeed. And I just don't know if that is a fair thing to be doing. Work is becoming harder and harder to find due to all of the above things that I've mentioned. This leads to strain on public services, food banks, and more. And by allowing the sheer number of people to come into the country that we did while all of these problems are happening, we are effectively draining our resources at breakneck speed. Stack on top of this our housing construction issue, which is a whole other topic for a whole other post. And we're just squeezing people for everything that they have. High cost of housing, poor employment, the picture is getting quite bleak. A lot of the economic factors I've mentioned are leading to the cost of home construction to become unfeasible for builders, and this should, in theory, lead to a renewed shortage of housing about 3 to 5 years from now, so we all have that to look forward to as well. So let's discuss the headline topic that I'm sure you all kind of came here to hear about, and that's the historically high youth unemployment rate. I've been reading some scary things about the 15 to 24 age group, which is the age group that Census Canada uses as kind of the youth age group. I don't know if it's completely representative because some of these people will be in high school and some of these people will be done university. So you do have quite a large range there, but I think it's good enough to give a general idea of the situation that a lot of young people are dealing with. If we look at statistics from what they call the core age group, 25 to 54-year-olds, they're actually currently experiencing above long-run average levels of employment. The youth age group, however, is not faring nearly that well. As of last year, employment was at somewhat normal levels for youth in Ontario, hovering around 11%. But in the latter half of 2024, it has jumped to about 17% and is getting worse. This is problematic because getting a job is important for development for a lot of young people. Your first crappy customer service job motivates you to find a better job. Internships lead to full-time roles, and you learn important life skills and how to work with others. These employment numbers getting worse are not bad only right now, but will be bad for the future of the workforce. Youth unemployment is a crisis. France has declared that youth unemployment is a national crisis, and their numbers are better than ours. So what does that say about us? These numbers are also directly impacting a lot of university graduates because it points to the fact that companies are hiring fewer and fewer new grads in an already extremely challenging environment to find work. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm just complaining to no end here, and I do believe in the hustle and working hard and all this stuff, but when you look at the numbers, it's hard to just ignore them outright. But you also should not give them too much credence over your life, because if you just spend all day whining and complaining, you'll make your hard time even harder. Just wanted to throw that in there because I know the tone of this video has been pretty depressing so far. So just know there is hope on the horizon. University graduates are struggling to find work and hiring freezes. This data backs up what I have been hearing anecdotally. I graduated from my engineering school in 2023, and I've been talking to others who graduated from school around the same time that I did. I've heard stories of people searching for work from anywhere 7 months to over a year and a half after graduation. And there are some people who are still looking for jobs. A client of mine that I spoke to about a month ago in my current job, who works for a materials engineering company, told me that the company is currently in a hiring freeze, and he knows of pretty much every company in this industry, and they are all kind of doing the same thing. This was as of November 2024. Every engineering graduate I've recently spoken to agrees with me when I make the comment, I wasn't aware that when I started school, part of the gig would be moving to the US. It's not only just to find a job that pays well, but to find literally any job at all. It seems like one of the only paths right now for people who graduate from a Canadian university is to move to the US. You suffer through years of engineering just to continue to suffer for another year or more to find a Canadian engineering job. Oh, I also forgot to say you can move to Alberta too, but nobody wants to do that. It's extremely disheartening, and I don't blame, sorry, Alberta. It's extremely disheartening, and I don't blame people for feeling disenfranchised with Canada or their expensive educations because of it. I can think of a greater number of people from my engineering cohort who are working in the US than those who are working in Canada. The ones who are working in Canada are only doing so because they are international students and have no other choice but to work here, and had to work their absolute butts off applying to jobs so they didn't get kicked out of the country. But they would also much prefer to be working in the United States. And likely, once they have Canadian citizenship, they will go that route. I don't know how else to say this, but we simply just don't have enough jobs in Canada and Ontario, and we don't have enough diversity in our economy to keep people from leaving. And the US benefits from all of these people that we have spent some taxpayer dollars educating. We're not getting the benefit as a country from all of these highly educated people and individuals. And the people who do stay here kind of just feel like, they got the short end of the stick. Another relevant point here is that as companies continue to cut costs, tighten their belts, possibly lay off higher qualified workers, why bother hiring a new grad you have to train completely from scratch when there's a pool of much more experienced, more qualified people for you to choose from? This also contributes to the bleak outlook for youth employment. The numbers back this up because, again, employment in core workers is steady and rising, while it is falling for youth. Diverging a bit from the data again, I read recently a comment from a Canadian online forum that used to be able to just walk into pretty much any retail store and ask for a job and you'd be hired almost immediately. But even these basic jobs are much harder to come by and are staffed frequently by people who are way overqualified or workers who aren't getting paid properly for one reason or another. And these jobs are also more competitive and harder to find than they were 10 years ago. Continuing on this same vein, another concerning trend is that we are losing full-time jobs almost at the same rate that we are gaining part-time jobs. Our employment situation is actually much worse than the numbers make it seem, just to make you feel even better. Full-time jobs are being replaced by part-time jobs and gig work. This is a problem and underscores that quality of life has likely declined for a significant portion of the population. Full-time stable employment is becoming a thing of the past for many people, and they are replacing it with one or more part-time jobs. Along the same vein is underemployment. Canada is notorious for this. Everyone has a story of when they discovered that their Uber driver was a doctor and now can't get the qualifications in order to become a doctor in Canada. That being said, I don't have any issue with doctors having to go through some amount of training and recertification and spending a couple of years to get up to speed on how we do things here. But not having spots available for these people in residency programs and yet having a huge shortage of family doctors makes absolutely no sense. Like, what are we doing here? Whenever I hear that a new graduate from university is working at McDonald's just like they were in high school, the only difference is that they have a 4-year university degree and are $30,000 more in debt, I feel kind of the same way as I do about overqualified doctors coming to Canada and then working as Uber drivers. The situation is bizarre. This reminds me of an ad that I would see at university in Hamilton that made me laugh. It was a different university, Brock University, advertising that 98% of its graduates were employed within 2 years of graduation. No mention of whether those graduates were employed in their field or a related field, or if they were using their degree at all for the employment that they had. So I would always joke, yeah, and 50% of them are working at McDonald's. It's not impressive that after 2 years out from school, you might finally decide to move out of your parents' basement and start working literally any job to pay back your student loans. I knew it was bad 5 years ago, and it's only gotten worse thanks to all these knock-on effects of the pandemic and other world events that we're seeing. Back to the question that I posed at the top. Why is Toronto and Ontario worse than the rest of the country? The answer lies mainly in the number of people who choose to come to the province. Ontario is the largest province, has the most schools, and brings in the most people. But we also don't have as diverse of an economy as the United States. We are not actually the profit center of Canada. That honor goes to our Silicon Valley, Alberta, and their oil. We don't have the most profitable enterprises in the country, yet we have the most people coming here. Supply and demand. The demand to live and work in Ontario and Toronto is much higher than the supply of jobs. Therefore, you see the phenomenon that I have been illustrating throughout. The supply-demand imbalance is also somewhat of a contributing factor to the issues I posed above related to youth unemployment, people leaving Canada, and our GDP problem. It also underscores the importance of the governments of Toronto and Ontario taking these issues seriously and trying to identify solutions to these problems. Much of the problem does still lie with the federal government and regulations and Bank of Canada policy and interest rates and other economic forces that are outside of your everyday person's control. But employment, especially for youth, is something that I believe needs to be addressed by all levels of government on top of what they're already doing with housing and managing immigration better. That's about all I have to say on the topic. I don't know if you found this interesting. Maybe this video just pissed you off. Either way, thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.